What is the hashtag delete Coinbase movement? When did it pop up? And what has users so mad that they are deleting their accounts? We're going to take a look into all of that and more. I'm Ben with the BTC Sessions, and this is your daily session.
Hodl that Bitcoin.
Now, before we dive into all of this here, I do want to preface this by saying I am not perfect by any means. I'm going to be going through a lot of material. It took a long time to kind of go through everything here. There's a lot of history to the relationship between users and Coinbase, the platform itself, as well as the CEO. And so I tried to touch on everything, but by no means am I covering everything. There's just too much to put in here. Also, who knows, I may misspeak over some of this stuff, so I do encourage you to go back, take a look at the links that I provide, and do some of your own research and take a look at other articles not included here. Of course, I'm an individual. I've kind of lived through a lot of this stuff, and so I have a pretty strong opinion myself. So if you don't like that, then maybe this isn't the place for you to be getting your news. But I'm giving this from my perspective while throwing in a lot of the articles that I think support the way I feel. So without further ado, let's dive in. So hashtag delete Coinbase. What is it? Well, it is a movement that just started recently after the acquisition of Neutrino by Coinbase. Neutrino is we'll say, controversial blockchain analytics company. And after they acquired them, users were angry and started this movement deciding to delete their accounts from Coinbase. We will get into that momentarily, but we're going to actually take a step back and we're going to go back to the beginnings of the company and take a look at where things started to go awry and take a look at some of the many missteps that the company has made that has angered so many users to the point where things have boiled over most recently with this movement. So we're going to go back to 2012 and excuse my notes here, but so Coinbase started offering services in October 2012. Before that, they had been part of Y Combinator, which was essentially a way to kind of back early companies that needed funds. So they got some VC money from Union Square Ventures, Andreessen Horowitz, and others. They started as a Bitcoin-only company, and honestly, they were a great early on-ramp for early adopters of Bitcoin to get into the ecosystem and get Bitcoin in a way that was not so scary. And just to kind of speak to the fact that they were very pro-Bitcoin and not looking into other things, this early tweet by the CEO, Brian Armstrong, this was in February 23rd of 2015, where he says, Ripple, Stellar, and altcoins are all a distraction. Bitcoin is way too far ahead. We should be focused on Bitcoin and sidechains. And so this is just kind of taking a look at where their mindset was early on, and people were more or less pretty happy with this take, and people nowadays look back at this and say, where is the Coinbase of the past? So we're going to take a look at where things started to go awry. And I think part of this has to do with the fact that the way that Bitcoin is structured, it is a protocol and it is difficult to change, and it takes time because developers are trying to take a very conservative and measured approach and test everything before rolling things out. They also want to maintain things like backwards compatibility when possible, and they want to avoid making it uneconomical for individuals to run nodes. And with all of that in mind, you have to look at things like scaling. And so many propositions were put forward to scale the network. However, many of them were also very controversial because they involve something called a hard fork, which is a non-backwards compatible upgrade or change to the network. And the problem with that when it comes to Bitcoin and having money on an ecosystem that everybody has to be updated in real time is if anybody doesn't update at the same time, then you can essentially be dealing with money that is not in consensus with everybody else's current state of the ledger. So you could be looking at a ledger that is not the same as anybody else's and thus be spending money that is not really there or receiving money that is not really there. Furthermore, if you can do hard forks to the network at will very easily, then something like changing the supply cap of Bitcoin would feasibly be something that is not difficult to achieve, which would kind of ruin the proposition of sound money of Bitcoin itself. I digress. Let's take a look at the shifting sentiment of Brian Armstrong over time as controversial hard forks were proposed. And there were a few of them, and he supported every one unsuccessfully. So the first one was something called Bitcoin XT. This was proposed by a couple previous developers of Bitcoin, and Gavin Andreessen was one of them, and another one was Mike Hearn, were both involved. Mike Hearn famously rage quit Bitcoin, saying that it was a failed experiment, and moved on to work for R3, which was essentially a consortium of banks. So anyways, here's Brian Armstrong pushing for Bitcoin XT, which ended up essentially failing and not being adopted. Then Bitcoin Classic was put forth, and Brian Armstrong started to try and run them online and support that through Coinbase. However, once again, that was failed. It did not get consensus, and he was really pushing for it. This was kind of just a 2 megabyte block upgrade, but again, a hard fork, non-backwards compatible. And finally, there was segwit 2x, which Brian Armstrong also supported. However, this one was a little bit more contentious than all of the others. Why? Well, because there was a closed-door meeting called the New York Agreement between a lot of different people. Barry Silbert helped put it together, but some of the main companies that were involved were Coinbase, Blockchain.info, BitPay, and Shapeshift, amongst others. And the narrative here was, hey, Bitcoin isn't working for our business models. Let's fire the core developers and install our own team of developers. However, it was done under the guise of, we need scaling now because we can't onboard new users and it's going to kill the protocol. So it was a way to supposedly compromise, but this compromise involved booting out everybody that was currently working on Bitcoin as a developer and installing a new bunch of developers. Now, this was very, very controversial at the time, and the problem with it is, if a number of companies were able to come together, completely switch out the developers behind Bitcoin and install their own, then what's to stop, even if this wasn't a nefarious thing in its inception, which that's arguable in the first place, but let's say they had the best intent and only wanted to further bootstrap the network and help it grow. Well, if they can go and they can kick out all of the developers, take over the protocol, and install their own, what's to stop the US government from then going to those companies and saying, you need to do this. You need to install all of these different things to mass surveil the populace via this protocol. And in that case, it would already be proven that they have the power to make changes to the code base. So it's a very, very scary precedent to set that companies could come in and make those sweeping changes. And it is very, very lucky that we narrowly averted that. So let's take a look here. I'll show you why. So here's something written by Brian Armstrong in February of 2016 as the block size and scaling debate was kind of starting to heat up. Title was, I'll bet you $5,000 that Bitcoin's first hard fork works out just fine. Now, a few months after this, Ethereum did hard fork, and there were some issues with that hard fork, and it wasn't really cut and dry right off the bat. And we won't dive too far into that, but this was the result of the segwit 2x fork. Now, I should preface this by saying all of these companies backed out last minute, literally a day before this thing was supposed to go live. So there was a large user base that was pushing back against this. They did not want to kick out the core contributors. They did not want a new set of devs installed. They believed that hard forks were not a desirable outcome. And I believe it was BitMEX actually set up a futures market so that people could essentially allocate capital betting on which side of the fork would be more valuable. And leading up to this event, the segwit 2x coin was at about a quarter of the value of a single Bitcoin. So it was clear that the market did not want it. And I believe mainly because of that, all of these companies backed out 24 hours beforehand. Now, the protocol was allowed to activate, and it's a damn good thing that all of these companies didn't push it live, because it failed spectacularly. As soon as it went live, the network essentially ground to a halt. Had that been Bitcoin, or had everybody decided that was going to be Bitcoin, well, essentially the network would have stopped functioning. And it was a huge bullet dodged here. The problem was they didn't test the code, and this is the whole thing behind the reasoning with Bitcoin Core taking that slow and steady approach, is because stuff like this can happen. Now, as I said, segwit2x was all about scaling the network, trying to allow more transactions every block, or more transactions per second, however you want to measure it. Well, it turns out that Coinbase wasn't already trying to optimize the space that they had available. Segwit had already activated early in 2017, in August actually, and it was available to be used, and Coinbase had not yet implemented it, even at the time of the 2x fork that they were pushing. They already weren't utilizing block space well. On top of that, they were not even batching transactions. For those of you unfamiliar, batching transactions, especially when it comes to an exchange like this, can optimize space like crazy, because so many transactions are happening. When somebody goes to withdraw from Coinbase, they were doing it as a single transaction on the blockchain, whereas they could have been waiting every 5, 10, 20 minutes, however much every block, and putting through a huge batch of transactions, all of those outputs in a single input, and they could have been saving so much space. You can see down here in the comments, they don't even batch transactions. And one of the users said, nope, and they use about 58% of available block space because of it. So essentially, Coinbase was more or less bogging down the network single-handedly because of their poor utilization of the blockchain as is. So after the failure of segwit2x, they then said, oh, hey, we're going to start looking at adding segwit and batching transactions now, I guess. Now, they didn't even end up adding segwit until February 23rd, 2018. So, 8 months after it was available to be added? So they were really dragging their heels, and that put a pretty bitter taste in a lot of people's mouths. So let's move on to yet another reason here. Insider trading. Nothing per se has been proven, but there's been a lot of allegations, and the way that they've rolled out some coins on the platform, again, has left a very bitter taste in many people's mouths. Let's take a look at Bitcoin Cash as an example. In August 1st, 2017, there was a split of the Bitcoin network where Bitcoin remained Bitcoin, and an offshoot utilized all of the previous state of the Bitcoin ledger and created Bitcoin Cash as an alternative to Bitcoin. Now, Coinbase did announce that it was going to support Bitcoin Cash, and that was not slated to happen until January 1st. So when the split happened, if you had Bitcoin at all, then in the same wallet, you would also have access to Bitcoin Cash. You would just have to utilize the Bitcoin Cash blockchain instead, and tools for that had to be built out for people to do it safely. So essentially, anybody who had money on Coinbase in the form of Bitcoin should have been awarded their Bitcoin Cash, and that's what they were referring to for January 1st. They were saying, okay, we will have this by January 1st, where anybody that had Bitcoin with us can access their Bitcoin Cash. Now, They ended up doing a surprise announcement on December 20th saying, surprise, we are adding Bitcoin Cash for everybody. You can now trade it. However, the prices of Bitcoin Cash on the platform were rising in advance of the announcement, which caused many to believe that insiders were tipped off as to the addition, causing a frenzy before the public even knew. So you can see here on the chart that it started spiking prior to the announcement because they didn't announce until later in the day on the 20th. So not only this, when they added Bitcoin Cash, you were allowed to buy it. You were not allowed to sell it at the time. Furthermore, the people that did just get their Bitcoin Cash, as in where they were holding Bitcoin on Coinbase and were, I guess, entitled to their Bitcoin Cash, those people were also not given access to their Bitcoin Cash, which probably further stopped the stem of selling. Not that they would have been able to sell anyways, but they may have been able to withdraw and sell elsewhere. Beyond that, there were a few other fishy things going on that day. Roger Ver just happened to also have an interview that day on MSNBC. Further to that, MSNBC, the marketing manager is Gabby Wassensteiner. Wassensteiner? I think I'm saying that right. Her husband is the executive director of the Bitcoin Cash Fund. And the Twitter for MSNBC has parroted a lot of Bitcoin Cash propaganda. So it was very fishy, the timing of all of this. There's even accusations that that Gabby's husband was actually posting as CNBC Fast Money, especially around this time. But again, nothing was ever fully proven. The last thing that was also very fishy about this time was that on GDAX, the Coinbase professional trading platform, the price of Bitcoin Cash on this day was $9,500 US, though trading was not even enabled here and was paused. And so that price just sat there, and I believe was very misleading for people that were going on and looking at it and thinking, wow, it's popped up that much, I better buy some, contributing even furthermore to the FOMO. You can see the spike that happened here. It went from what, around 1,800, and within 24 hours is up to 3,600. It was insane. And these were the prices on Coinbase where you could only buy and you could not sell. Now, it was just a lot all at once. There's continues to be allegations of insider trading around that event, though it was dismissed from court. And since then, had you bought on that day, December 20th, 2017, if you traded in your Bitcoin for Bitcoin Cash at that point, you have never been made whole again. Here's the chart. Here's December 20th right now. It hit a high of 24.4% of a Bitcoin. And today, you can see it was pretty much all downhill from that day. Today, it's trading at about 3.4% of a Bitcoin. Now, if you do factor in the split that happened of Bitcoin Cash since then, and add in the value of Bitcoin SV, you're still only adding 1.7% there for a grand total of 5.1% of a Bitcoin. So you're down about 80% versus Bitcoin. And that's on top of the losses that Bitcoin itself has taken just through the bear market. So scary, scary. Now, oh man, I've got a whole other browser window full of tabs. So what about more insider trading? There's also been rumbles around the recent addition of XRP to the platform. So there was a launch of XRP again prior to trading. the value of XRP went up to about 6.3% before the announcement even happened. Also, this seems to violate their terms of adding coins that they set out for themselves. They said that no company could own a controlling stake in an asset for them to add it. Well, Ripple Labs owns 60% of all XRP. It's pretty clear that they were the ones that created XRP, even though they say that Ripple didn't exist prior to XRP existing, but I think that's total trash. Not only that, if you take a look at this, this is a tracker that keeps track of the number of transactions per per day that are over 5 million XRP. And you can kind of see it was pretty normal about 2 weeks prior, and then it just started kind of ballooning in the days leading up to the the announcement of XRP. So on February 25th, 16 transactions that took place. 9 transactions occurred a few hours before the announcement. Although the transactions were into multiple wallets, they cumulatively amounted to 88.7 million XRP, which is a total of accumulation of about 25.7 million US dollars of XRP being accumulated before the announcement. So they did kind of balloon beforehand, and it is just very suspicious. Now, something similar happened to this years prior when they added Litecoin, the difference being that Charlie Lee, the creator of Litecoin, currently worked at Coinbase when this happened. Again, there were speculations of insider trading there, and he left Coinbase a month after that. Moving on to my next point here, man, the idea of diversification. Coinbase, since Bitcoin has stopped, well, I guess it never did, but since their business model has clearly not been in line with how Bitcoin actually works, they've turned into a little bit of what I like to deem a shitcoin factory. You can say otherwise, but they've just started adding a lot of different assets and encouraging diversification. Now, they've also started paying people to learn about the assets that they are listing. So they have an education program where, let's say you want to learn about 0x, which is something that they listed and pumped. You can do that and you can get rewarded a small amount. So here's the thing on their platform, beginner lessons. Go ahead, take a look at this, and they'll teach you about 0x, and this is meant to encourage people to diversify and try out these other assets. The problem with this is that they're treating all coins as equal, and that all of them should be a store of value and are likely going to go up in value, because if you have these coins on Coinbase and you're holding them in your Coinbase account, you're not utilizing them for the purpose that they were created for. You're speculating on them. So I'm not a big fan of this, hey, learn about the coin we just listed, and oh, by the way, buy it here kind of approach. Some don't see it as bad. They think that any learning is good, but I do see this as a little bit predatory because it doesn't take into account a lot of different factors here, and it treats all of these other assets listed here. Where are they again? All of these other assets listed here as being equal to Bitcoin in value proposition, and that everybody should consider them all equally, which I do not believe to be the case. Let's dive into the Coinbase Wallet. Now, the Coinbase Wallet is separate from the Coinbase exchange itself. Coinbase Wallet is a wallet where you can hold your own private keys yourself. Wonderful, you don't have to keep your Bitcoin on the exchange, and you can still use something from Coinbase. Or is it? Well, the Coinbase Wallet launched initially with no support for Bitcoin, which many Bitcoiners found to be a bit of a slap in the face, given that that's what Coinbase started as, a Bitcoin-only exchange. Well, when they added Bitcoin to their mobile wallet and announced it like it was some great achievement, there was a lot of backlash for that, saying, what is this, 2012? Beyond that, they also launched a service where you could store your keys, the private keys to your cryptocurrency, in the cloud. Now, granted, your keys were also encrypted when placed in the cloud, but this is nonetheless a terrible, terrible idea when it comes to security. People are notoriously bad for making bad passwords, and if you put your keys to your cryptocurrency in the cloud, those services are essentially hacked all the time. It's no better than putting your keys encrypted on Google Drive, really. And as I said, they're always compromised. And if you have a bad password and somebody is able to brute force it, well, all of your money is just gone. I think this was so incredibly responsible. I can't believe it. And so now this brings us to the last and final piece of the puzzle that has really caused this whole thing to boil over, and that is the acquisition of Neutrino. So let's dive into Neutrino. And so this is from the Coinbase blog, and they talk a lot about what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish here. So they say in the blog that with the addition of this blockchain intelligence platform, their goal is to bring the open financial system to the world. They're trying to crack down on theft, ransomware, and bad actors. Okay, fair enough. But people are mad. Why? Let's take a look at who Neutrino is. So Neutrino was founded by 3 former employees of Hacking Team. Who's Hacking Team? Well, Hacking Team, they are responsible for selling spyware to oppressive governments like Ethiopia, Sudan, Morocco, Saudi Arabia. How are these governments using the services offered by Hacking Team? Well, in Morocco, they were spying on citizen journalist sites, which were then promptly shut down because they were worried about being spied upon and having negative consequences come to them. The Saudis, they use this to murder a journalist. So Jamal Khashoggi, I hope I'm saying that right. Anyways, he was a journalist that was critical of the Saudi regime. And so he ended up, and I will include links to this down below, he essentially ended up going to the Saudi embassy while he was in Turkey, and he went in and he never came back out. He was murdered by what, according to the Saudi government, was a rogue agent. But audio tapes of the whole ordeal, which are horrifying to listen to, paint a very different picture, and it was very likely that there was a team of actual Saudi agents pictured here. You can read about this down below. I'm not going to dive too deep into the story, but suffice it to say that Hacker Team essentially are not a great group of people, and they are just a terrible company to align yourself with. And I'm referring to Neutrino because it was founded by 3 former employees of Hacker Team. So, I mean, blockchain analytics are already undesirable enough because it essentially means that somebody's keeping tabs on your blockchain transactions. But Coinbase had plenty of different options when it came to working with various companies, and they've chosen to go with these guys from Neutrino, Hacker Team. So why would you choose the one with a history of aiding authoritarian governments that have committed human rights violations? And so there's a quote actually from my boss at Bull Bitcoin, Francis. He said, "Coinbase acquired Neutrino, built for governments to track and de-anonymize Bitcoiners. Founded by 2 co-founders, CTOs, plus the former COO of Hacking Team, a pro-government mercenary hacker firm that gave Saudis tools and consulting to track, eliminate dissidents. Run." Okay, so we've gone through a lot here. Let's sum it all up really quickly and just kind of go through all of the items that we've listed. So Coinbase has supported every single contentious hard fork to the bitter end. With segwit 2x, we narrowly averted disaster, largely thanks to the futures markets launched by BitMEX that showed the market was not going to support this fork. Even still, the code was allowed to run forward, and it essentially ground to a halt, and that would have been the whole network had we gone with that fork. There's been regular occurrences of shady practices that look suspiciously like insider trading. At the very least, botched attempts to add new coins. They encourage risky asset allocations, and they treat the risk reward of a lot of these trashy coins as if it was the same as holding Bitcoin. They have awful security suggestions. They're recommending that people go ahead and leave their keys in the cloud, which is incredibly irresponsible. And finally, now they're enabling mass surveillance on the blockchain through their platform with software that was put together by people who, in my eyes, are accessory to murder. So now the question is, what can you do about it? And that's what Delete Coinbase is about. Do you want to know how to delete your Coinbase account? Well, if you don't already, Stefan Livera put it really, really simply. For Delete Coinbase, log in, go to Settings, go to Security, scroll down to Close Account. Now, unfortunately, there's been issues. Surprise, surprise. If you scroll through the hashtag on Twitter, you will come across people that have been running into... Now, there's a lot of tweets here, but there's been people that have been saying, I can't delete. Why isn't Coinbase allowing me to delete my account? Send help. So one of the issues is you can't have any funds in your account whatsoever. Makes sense. But unfortunately, some of the amounts that you may have sitting in your account, particularly if you had coins left in there from the fork, they may be too small to actually send on the blockchain. So in order to clear out your account, you have to send them to another user. So they've created the, what is it? Oh, God. It was something like the Delete Coinbase Trust Chain. That's what it was. So if you need to, you can, they're creating a trust chain where you can send your dust amounts, your tiny amounts of whatever coins to other users so that you can delete your account. Now, some people have still gone through this effort and have not been able to delete their account, but I guess we'll see what happens over time. Anyways, yeah, you can see a lot of these issues. Thanks for reaching out. I understand your frustrations with this account issue. Appreciate your patience. Saying that they need 5 to 7 business days, maybe longer, to delete an account. So hopefully, if you want to delete your account, you can. But crappy nonetheless. Anyways, guys, I do hope you've enjoyed this video. I tried to sum it up the best I could, but there's just so much stuff to cover, and hopefully I didn't misspeak too much through this, but let me know your thoughts. Is all of this deterring you from using Coinbase? Are you planning on deleting your Coinbase account? Do you think it's a bad idea? Why? Let me know in the comments down below. Other than that, if you found this information useful, then please do hit me up if you'd like to drop a tip via the Lightning Network. I do have a link at the very end where you can use tippin.me. If you want to drop a few sats in there, go ahead. And other than that, you can also send, of course, regular on-chain Bitcoin transactions with my QR code at the end of the video. Guys, thank you so much. I'm sorry this was a bit long-winded, but hopefully the information was useful to you. I will see you guys after the weekend for your daily session.